My name is Sofia Alvarez, and I am 17 years old, a senior at a public high school on the outskirts of California. Our family lives in a small house that carries both warmth and worry. Sharing it with us is my grandmother, Rosa, who is 68. She speaks only Spanish, her mother tongue, and suffers from a serious heart condition that keeps her fragile most days. My mother, Elena, is 42 and works as a nurse in a hospital nearly 50 minutes away. 'Cause she usually takes the night shift, I am the one who stays home, watching over my grandmother, making sure she eats, takes her medicine, and never feels alone. Life at school, however, is a different battle altogether. Our principal, James Carter, a 55-year-old former military officer, has shaped the school under his rigid hand. He enforces a rule that feels almost impossible for me to follow. No language is allowed inside the school walls except English. Not a single word. Speaking Spanish or any other language is considered a violation. Punishment is severe: 3 days of suspension, a permanent note on the record, and a shadow that could easily darken any college application. Every day, I walk the halls with this silent fear pressing against me. If you're still listening, we want to sincerely thank you for spending your time with us. Truly means a lot. We'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments and let's see how far this message has reached. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, I highly recommend doing it now so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. These aren't just ordinary stories. They're filled with meaningful life lessons that can inspire, teach, and stay with you long after the video ends. Hit that subscribe button and join our growing community. The rule felt like a blade suspended above our heads, sharp and merciless, waiting for the smallest slip to fall. For students like me, children of Mexican immigrants, or those from Korean and Haitian families, it was more than a rule. It was a constant threat against our identities. I had already witnessed how unforgiving it could be. My closest friend, Lynn Tran, 17 like me, was suspended after she instinctively answered her mother in Vietnamese on the phone. Her mother had called in panic, telling her that her grandmother had been in a car accident. Instead of compassion, the school handed her punishment, as if her concern for family was a crime. Another classmate, Jacques-Pierre, 16, lost his spot on the basketball team after blurting out a Creole curse when he fell hard on the court. That one word, born out of pain, was enough to erase months of training and the chance he had been chasing. Watching them, I learned to bury Spanish inside me, though at home it was the very air I breathed. I even created a secret system with my grandmother. 3 knocks on the table meant "take your medicine," meant "call mom." It was the only way to keep her safe without breaking the rule. But one afternoon during history class, the fragile balance shattered. My phone, hidden in my bag, vibrated over and over. First, I ignored it, terrified of being caught. But when it wouldn't stop, I slipped out into the hallway. Caller ID froze my blood. Senora Maria Lopez, our 60-year-old neighbor and retired seamstress. She had called nearly 30 times. With trembling hands, I answered. Her voice was frantic. My grandmother had collapsed, her heart barely beating. I didn't think. Spanish spilled out of me like a flood. I told Senora Maria exactly where to find the right bottle, the white one on the 3rd shelf, not the blue one, the one that could trigger her allergies. Maria was panicked, and I had to shout directions over the noise of the paramedics arriving. They didn't understand her Spanish, so I held the phone up, translating desperately, my voice cracking as I sprinted toward the parking lot. Between breaths, I yelled medical terms, switching languages so fast my tongue stumbled, terrified each second might be the one where I lost her forever. My chest burned, my legs shook, but only one thought thundered through me: Abuela cannot die. Not now. Not like this. I had no idea he was there. Principal Carter stood at the end of the hallway like a shadow, his phone raised, his expression as hard and unyielding as stone. The red light from the camera glowed faintly, and even without words, I could feel his judgment burning into me. While I was screaming for help, while my heart raced in terror at the thought of losing my grandmother, he was quietly documenting my crime. Hours later at the hospital, relief washed over me in waves. My grandmother survived. The doctor told us plainly. Had Senora Lopez given her the wrong medication, the blue bottle instead of the white one, my abuela would have died within minutes. The only reason she was alive was because of the directions I shouted in Spanish. My hands still trembled as I held hers, her pulse faint but steady under my fingers. For that moment, I allowed myself to believe the nightmare was over. But the next morning, reality struck with cruel precision. I was summoned to Principal Carter's office. The walls were lined with military plaques and photographs of soldiers in uniform, reminders of his past and of the discipline he worshipped. He didn't waste time. Without greeting me, he played the video on his phone. There I was in the hallway, shouting into the receiver in desperate Spanish. My words echoed in his office, every syllable sounding louder, sharper, as if each one was a bullet. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes cold. "You deliberately challenged school policy," he said flatly. "No," I stammered. "It was life or death. My grandmother." He cut me off with a raised hand. "Emergencies do not excuse disobedience. Regulations exist for a reason. You knew the rule. You broke it." On his desk, a suspension slip already bore my name in bold black letters. He picked it up slowly, like a judge handing down a sentence. I felt the silence in the room press against me, suffocating. My throat tightened, words clawed to escape, but before I could finish another sentence, he delivered his final line like a gavel striking. "Emergency does not override policy." The paper slid across the desk toward me. My future, college applications, scholarships, recommendations, suddenly seemed to teeter on the edge of ruin. I begged him to let me call my mother, certain she could reason with him, but he refused. "Your mother may call," he said curtly, "but only in English, or with an approved interpreter." Then he paused, his lips curling slightly, almost as if mocking me. "And we don't provide interpreters." When I left his office, clutching the paper that branded me guilty, I felt the eyes of my classmates on me. The hallway buzzed with whispers, but no one spoke aloud. Fear had sealed their mouths. No one wanted to be the next target. That evening, sitting at the kitchen table while my grandmother slept in the next room, I opened my laptop and searched desperately for help. That's when I found Daniel Kim. He wasn't just the school counselor. He was also known in the community as a quiet but relentless advocate for immigrant families. 35, he had already taken on several cases of unfair school policies and discriminatory practices. When I explained what had happened, his eyes darkened with anger, though his voice remained calm. "They're using fear as control," he said. "But fear isn't law. There are protections against this." He leaned forward, his tone firm but encouraging. "We'll prepare for your hearing. Collect everything, medical documents, witness statements, anything that proves what you did was necessary, not rebellion. This isn't just about you, Sofia. This is about everyone silenced by that rule." For the first time since the nightmare began, I felt a flicker of hope. I started gathering evidence methodically. From the hospital, I requested letters confirming that my instructions had been critical to saving my grandmother's life. The doctors didn't hesitate. They wrote in detail that without my Spanish directions, the wrong medication could have ended her life within minutes. I also reached out quietly to families I knew at school, parents who whispered in hushed tones about the rule but never dared to speak openly. Some were too afraid to sign anything, but a few agreed to provide anonymous testimonies. They told of children punished for speaking to siblings, for helping parents translate, for slipping into the language that carried their love and culture. At night, I typed their words into documents, labeling them Anonymous Family A, Family B, and so on. Each story cut deeper. A boy suspended for translating a doctor's instructions for his mother. A girl punished for praying in her native language. Daniel reviewed everything, nodding slowly as the stack of papers grew. "This is strong," he said. "It shows a pattern. We're going to file a complaint with the district under anti-discrimination law. This policy doesn't just punish, it targets." I exhaled, clutching the growing folder to my chest. For the first time, the weight pressing down on me didn't feel like suffocation, it felt like armor. Still, fear lingered. Principal Carter's shadow loomed large, and I knew the road ahead would not be easy. But as I watched my grandmother sleep peacefully, her chest rising and falling, I whispered a silent vow. I would fight, not just for myself, but for every voice this rule tried to erase. In the days leading up to the hearing, more stories began to surface, each one carving deeper cracks into the facade of Principal Carter's authority. A Korean student, pale and trembling, confided in me that he had been suspended after answering his father's call during class. His father was having a stroke. His voice slurred and weak on the other end of the line, but the boy's instinctive use of Korean was punished as though he had cursed in the middle of the lesson. The shame in his eyes when he spoke told me the punishment had scarred more than just his school record. Another parent, a Haitian mother, admitted she no longer attended her daughter's recitals or sports events. The fear of accidentally slipping into Creole in a public space where school staff might overhear was too much for her. She wept quietly as she explained how it hurt her child, how her daughter scanned the crowd, always searching for her mother's face, never finding it. What kind of rule stripped parents of the joy of celebrating their children? Tension in our community was mounting. And then came the discovery that made my blood run cold. With Daniel's help, I dug deeper into Carter's past. We found a record, thinly veiled but unmistakable, that he had been sued years ago at another school for discriminatory practices. The case had disappeared, quietly settled, buried under the district's eagerness to protect one of their strict disciplinarians. It was a cover-up, one that allowed him to continue ruling with an iron fist, unchecked and unchallenged. And then one night, my phone buzzed with a new message. Classmate had secretly recorded Carter during the exact moment of my emergency call. In the video, he wasn't just a passerby catching me by chance. He was lurking at the end of the hallway, standing deliberately with his phone ready. The angle showed him waiting, anticipating, like a hunter preparing for prey. The realization hit me hard. He had wanted me to fail. He hadn't cared if my grandmother lived or died. He cared about catching me in the act, about making an example. I sent the video to Daniel immediately, my hands shaking with anger. He called me within minutes, his voice steady. "This is powerful evidence," he said. "But remember, don't get lost in emotion. Stick to the facts. The truth will be stronger than outrage." Together, we crafted my official complaint. I spent hours typing, revising, and polishing, citing Section 6 protections about linguistic rights and discrimination. Each sentence felt like a lifeline, tethering me to justice. But I knew the system could bury it, file it away, delay it, suffocate it under bureaucracy. Till I had to try. For my grandmother. For Lynn. For Jacques. For all the voices silenced by fear. The morning of the hearing, I felt as though I were walking into a battlefield. My mother walked with me, silent but fierce, her tired nurse's eyes holding both exhaustion and fire. The meeting room smelled of polished wood and stale coffee. The long table sat the people who would decide my fate. Principal Carter, stiff in his suit, radiated control. Beside him was Vice Principal Michael Reed, a 48-year-old former lawyer whose sharp gaze scanned the documents with clinical detachment. The far end sat Susan Hayes, a 50-year-old district representative, her expression softer, her posture less rigid. Something in her demeanor suggested she might actually listen. I looked around the room and felt my stomach twist. No interpreter had been provided despite my request. If my grandmother had wanted to testify, she would have been silenced before she even began. They called me to speak. My voice trembled at first, but then steadied. I told the story, every detail, from the 30 desperate calls from Senora Lopez to the exact instructions that saved my grandmother's life. I laid the hospital letters on the table, the black ink confirming the truth that my words alone might not carry. I read the anonymous testimonies, carefully shielding identities but exposing the pain. Carter interrupted once, his voice dripping with disdain. She had alternatives. She could have spoken in English. I forced myself not to look at him. There was no time, I said. No intérprete. No staff who understood Spanish. Seconds mattered. A wrong bottle could have killed her. The hospital itself confirms it. Reed adjusted his glasses, scribbling notes with the precision of a courtroom stenographer. Hayes leaned forward, studying the hospital documents with furrowed brows. For the first time, I felt the weight in the room shift ever so slightly. When I finished, silence lingered. My heart pounded, my palms damp against the papers. In that moment, I realized this wasn't just about my record. It was about whether truth could pierce the armor of bureaucracy. Whether my voice, trembling but unbroken, could carry further than Carter's cold video. And as I sat back, waiting for their response, I knew one thing for certain. No matter the outcome, I would not be silent again. My mother sat beside me during the hearing, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, knuckles pale against her brown skin. She had never liked speaking in public, never liked being the center of attention. English was her second language, one she learned in the chaos of long hospital shifts and late-night classes. But when she saw me struggling against Principal Carter's rigid words, she gathered her strength. Her voice trembled at first, but she forced herself to continue. She spoke of her life in America, the nights she had been mocked for her accent, the patients who rolled their eyes when she mispronounced a term, the colleagues who whispered that her English was good enough for a foreigner. And then she looked straight at Carter, her voice gaining volume, tears brimming in her eyes. Do you know what it is like to be silenced in the language of your heart? Do you know what it is like to fear your child losing everything, her scholarship, her future, because she dared to save her grandmother's life? The room went quiet. Even Reed, the vice principal who had sat stone-faced, shifted uncomfortably. For a moment, I felt the wall around Carter crack. But then his jaw hardened again, and his voice cut through the silence. Rules exist for discipline, he said sharply. Without discipline, there is chaos. Language unity ensures order. If we allow exceptions, then where does it end? Every student will claim emergencies. Every family will undermine our system. It was as if he had not heard a single word. But Susan Hayes had. She leaned forward, tapping the hospital letter with the end of her pen. Mr. Carter, what I see here is not a student undermining policy. I see a student preventing a fatal error. The law requires schools to protect the well-being of their students and families. I have to question whether this rule in its current form is reasonable, or whether it crosses into discrimination. Carter's face darkened, but Hayes did not flinch. Given the evidence, I propose we halt any permanent disciplinary action until the district reviews this policy thoroughly. Reed cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. So a compromise, he muttered. The verdict came down like a half measure, a wound only partially bandaged. I was suspended for 1 day. My record was marked under review. It wasn't the permanent scar Carter wanted, but it wasn't freedom either. My relief was tainted with bitterness. That single day of suspension was enough to cost me dearly. When I returned, my chemistry teacher informed me I had missed the lab practical worth a significant portion of my grade. No makeups allowed. My A, the grade I had worked tirelessly for, slipped down to AB. It was more than a letter. It was a crack in the fragile bridge to my scholarship. Meanwhile, the district scrambled to respond to the scrutiny. Weeks later, they quietly announced an emergency exemption clause. In cases of verified medical crisis, students would not be punished for using another language. On paper, it was progress. But Carter ensured its impact was minimized. He presented it in a single school-wide assembly, his tone dismissive, his body language conveying irritation rather than accountability. "This exemption," he barked, "is not a loophole for rebellion. It is strictly limited. Abuse it and you will be disciplined." His message was clear. Mercy was an inconvenience, and anyone who dared to rely on it would pay. Back in the hallways, I felt the shift immediately. Whispers followed me like shadows. Some classmates avoided my eyes, afraid that speaking to me would draw Carter's scrutiny. Others muttered as I passed, their words sharp as knives. Troublemaker. Rule breaker. Drama queen. The isolation dug deep. The lunch, my usual table, grew emptier, one friend after another quietly drifting away. Their silence was worse than insults. It was abandonment in the face of fear. I understood they didn't want to risk their futures, but it didn't stop the ache in my chest. Yet even in that loneliness, I refused to disappear. Instead, I turned to the one place Carter couldn't censor me, words on paper. I sat down late one night, my lamp the only light in the house, and wrote. I wrote about what it felt like to choke back the language of my grandmother, to feel my throat ache with unsaid syllables, to live with the fear that one slip could erase my dreams. I described how it felt when Carter slid the suspension slip across the desk like a verdict on my identity, how every immigrant student carried that same silent blade above their heads. The next morning, I handed the essay to the editor of the school newspaper. 2 days later, it appeared in print under the headline, "The Language of Silence." First, I braced myself for ridicule. But something else happened. Students I barely knew began to approach me in the hallway, their voices low, their eyes uncertain but determined. A girl from Korea whispered, "My mom fainted once at a parent meeting, and I got detention for asking for help in Korean." A boy from Haiti admitted that he'd been warned after helping his younger brother with homework in Creole. And then the dam broke. Stories poured out, each one different, but all bound by the same thread of fear. Students from Asian, Haitian, and Latino families shared their pain, their embarrassment, their anger. My article had given them a crack to breathe through, a space to admit what they had buried. The whispers turned into conversations. Conversations turned into momentum. And slowly, I realized that while Carter's rule had sought to silence us, our shared stories could be louder than he ever imagined. But the cost was still there, heavy on my shoulders. My scholarship was not secure. My reputation was fractured. My friends were distant. I had won a small victory, but the war for our voices was only beginning. As I folded another copy of the newspaper and tucked it into my backpack, I knew Carter would see it as defiance. Maybe it was. But it was also survival. And in survival, there is no apology. That evening, as I sat quietly beside Rosa, I felt her hand gently resting on my head. It was such a simple gesture, yet it carried a weight that went far beyond comfort. It was as if her touch whispered to me, "You are not alone. You are allowed to exist as you are." For the first time in a long while, I felt the tension in my chest ease. I had spent so many nights curled up in silence, carrying shame like a heavy cloak, hiding in bathroom stalls just to whisper in code so no one would know I was speaking Spanish to my mother. I remember the cold tiles beneath my feet, the fluorescent lights above me, and the way fear made me shrink inside my own skin. But sitting there with Rosa, I realized something had shifted. I no longer needed to hide. I no longer needed to erase my mother's voice or tuck away the language of my childhood. Those whispers of fear had lost their grip. I had chosen something else, something stronger. I decided I would keep speaking up. I knew the hallways at school would still echo with whispers. I knew the stares and the smirks would not vanish overnight. But instead of curling inward, I would walk forward, carrying both languages with me, the English of my education and my scholarship dreams, and the Spanish of my heart, my family, my truth. I would not choose one over the other. I would hold them both because they are both me. And from this journey, I want to share with you 5 lessons I've learned. These lessons are not abstract ideas. They were carved into me through tears, silence, and the courage to rise again. 1. Never let others define your worth. For too long, I allowed other people's glances, laughter, and rules to shape how I saw myself. When I was suspended, when my scholarship was put at risk, it felt like the entire system was telling me, "You are a problem, you do not belong." But here's the truth I came to embrace. No policy, no authority figure, no rule written on a piece of paper gets to define who I am. Worth is not granted by institutions. It is lived and carried inside you. If you are listening to me right now and you've ever felt invisible, misunderstood, or too different, remember this. No one has the power to shrink your soul unless you hand them the scissors. 2. Silence protects no one. I thought hiding in bathrooms, speaking in coded knocks, and keeping my head down would keep me safe. But silence only made me feel smaller. It let injustice breathe freely while I suffocated. The moment I wrote my article for the school newspaper, everything changed. My story echoed through the halls, and suddenly other students, Asian, Haitian, Latino, came forward with their own truths. Silence had kept us isolated. Speaking broke the chains. So here's the lesson. Silence is not protection. It is surrender. When you tell your story, you give others permission to tell theirs, and that creates power. 3. Courage is not the absence of fear. People often assume courage means being fearless. I am here to tell you that is a lie. I was terrified every step of the way, terrified of losing my scholarship, of disappointing my family, of being branded as a troublemaker forever. Even the day of the hearing, my hands shook so much I thought everyone could see it. But courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to keep walking even when your knees are trembling. It is choosing to act despite the fear. That is what it took for me to sit in front of Mr. Carter and the district officials and tell the truth. That is what it takes to live authentically in a world that wants you to hide. For justice moves slowly, but seeds still grow. When the district finally issued that emergency exemption, it felt like a small victory overshadowed by bitterness. Mr. Carter minimized it, turning it into a footnote instead of a real change. My scholarship remained on shaky ground, and socially I became more isolated than ever. First, I thought nothing had been gained. But then I realized seeds take time to grow. My article, my testimony, my insistence, they planted something. Students were beginning to whisper differently, not just about me, but about the rules themselves. Parents started asking harder questions. Even Rosa told me, "These things take time, but once planted, truth will grow like roots you cannot pull out." And she was right. Justice doesn't always arrive with trumpets and headlines. Sometimes it creeps in slowly, like water seeping into dry ground. But it comes. 5. Your voice is your inheritance, never trade it away. Perhaps the most important lesson I learned is this: my voice in all its forms is my inheritance. English is the language that gives me access to books, science, opportunity. Spanish is the language that carries the love songs of my childhood, my mother's prayers, the rhythm of my people. Both are mine. When I stopped hiding, I realized my voice had never been the problem. Problem was a world that wanted to narrow me into something easier to manage. But I refused to trade away my inheritance for approval. And neither should you. Whether your voice is in words, art, music, or even silence filled with conviction, hold on to it. Protect it. 'Cause once you give it away, reclaiming it becomes the fight of a lifetime. That night, with Rosa's hand still resting gently on my head, I promised myself something. I would not bury my languages again. I would not shrink. I would walk the hallways, hear the whispers, endure the stares, and I would still speak. Because this battle isn't just mine. It belongs to every student who has ever been told they are too much or not enough. It belongs to every parent who has been silenced by shame. It belongs to every person who has ever felt their identity was an inconvenience. The fight is not over, but neither am I. I will carry English in one hand and Spanish in the other. and together they will make me whole. If my story touched you, if you found even one lesson here that speaks to your own life, then I ask you this: don't let it stop here. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Talk about it. Let it ripple beyond this moment. And if you want to walk with me as I keep sharing these stories of struggle, resilience, and truth, then please like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to the channel. Your support means more than numbers. It means this conversation continues louder, stronger, unstoppable. 'Cause when we raise our voices together, no wall of silence can stand.